Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world, and happy Earth Day to you. And welcome to the International Climate Change Governance webinar. The five of us you see on the screen, we're all delighted that you've joined us today for this investigation into COP26. And I'll introduce my colleagues as I bring them into different parts of the webinar. So I'll invite them now to wait for me in the virtual waiting room. And I'll call you out as we have some conversations over the next hour and a half. Thank you, colleagues. In the meantime, I'll ask for my slides to be put up, and I'll introduce myself in a moment. So again, welcome to the webinar. And if we could have the next slide, please. Briefly an introduction of me. My name is Ian Rowlands. I'm a professor in the School of Environment, Resources, and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo, and I'm also the Associate Vice President International at the University of Waterloo. And my research interests include climate, energy, decision-making, and governance. And as will come out during bits of this presentation, my own engagement with the COP process dates back a number of years. I'm delighted to be sharing some of my perspectives with you today, to be facilitating the contributions of others, and to hear from you as well. So if we could have the next slide, please. I'd like to take this opportunity to honor the land and the Indigenous heritage of the place in which I'm located today. I'm calling in from my home in Waterloo, in the city of Waterloo, and the University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations, that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building. Okay, next slide, please. This is the first of a series that will be hosted by IC3, the Interdisciplinary Center on Climate Change, that will have COP26 as a focus. So COP26, as you'll learn about more over the next hour and a half, is that 2-week gathering that will be held in Glasgow, United Kingdom in November 2021, where the world comes together to take stock of its collective action addressing global climate change and advancing SDG 13. Now, in a normal year, one might expect up to 40,000 people to gather in Glasgow, and amongst them would be a delegation of University of Waterloo students, along with a faculty member or a staff member as well. Though for those students who are engaged in the conference itself, it's an outstanding experience, experiential education in action, indeed global citizenry in action, and exposure to international diplomacy, effectiveness in developing their own communication skills in a professional setting too. And for those who don't travel, connection with fellow students who are there and their own activity back at home can be very important too. Well, this isn't a normal year, so we're not sure how things will unfold in November. But in any case, we're going to engage the Waterloo community in thinking about the COP process, and more importantly, acting and engaging with it as well. So this is the first in a series of events, and we encourage you to follow on Twitter, Climate Change UW, and the IC3 website more generally to see how you can get involved. And today's session will introduce all of you to climate change governance with a focus on the COP activity, the Conference of the Parties, and particular consideration of University of Waterloo student perspective as well. Okay, the next slide, please. And this is how things will unfold over the next hour and a half. I'll give about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, an overview, setting the scene of what the global international climate change governance is all about. Delighted I'm going to be joined by a colleague and friend who gives an insider's perspective. And then 3 individuals who went as students to COP25 will be on a panel to share their experiences and their learnings from their engagement. And then at the end, there'll be a chance for you to engage as well, where there'll be a question period. And throughout this session, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen Please feel free to submit questions there. And as I said, towards the end of the session, I'll turn to those questions and put them to our other participants today as well. Okay, next slide, please. Well, just to sort of sum up as I've called it there, the global climate change problem, just to get us on the same page as to what we're talking about today. Well, this shows that global temperature is rising, and that is being caused, it's widely believed, by increasing concentrations in greenhouse gases, which are caused by land use changes, emissions of carbon dioxide, and other greenhouse gases. And this rising temperature then has a range of biophysical and ecological impacts, which then have a range of socioeconomic impacts as well, which then means we may have to do something like the right-hand side of the screen suggests. There will have to be adaptation, and that adaptation will be expensive, it will be disruptive, it will be problematic in many ways. So the business as usual, the problem is that those temperatures are rising, average global temperatures, and causing consequential and dramatic changes in our Earth and in our world. The next slide, please. So if we're thinking about solving global climate change, it's not simply adapting to it, though that has to be part of the answer today because of all of the things that have happened over the course of the past couple of 100 years. And we can't simply continue to adapt because we're crossing dangerous thresholds in our global ecological systems, whereby many feel runaway climate change could be forthcoming if we don't do something. And that something, that solving, is taking this curve, which is in a dark color in front of you, which is annual global emissions of carbon dioxide, and breaking it and bending it down. So while we've seen that emissions have been rising steadily through the course of the Industrial Revolution and during the past couple of centuries, looking forward, the work at various levels we're going to talk about mean that we have to bring it down, bring emissions down by the order of 50 to 70% during the next decade, and by the order of the coming 3 decades, getting to so-called carbon neutrality as well. If I could have the next slide, please. So why don't we just do it? Why don't we just say, okay, well, let's stop causing this problem, and then that will be the solution. Well, the climate change problem and the emissions problem of greenhouse gases has a number of characteristics that makes it particularly challenging to solve. I've written here in front of you the spatial dimension. While emissions have local impacts too, they're often co-produced with other pollutants. Greenhouse gases have global consequences. Emission location is less consequential. So whether the energy-related activity occurred in Mumbai or Montreal or Monterey, it's going to have global consequences. And it's pervasive as well. Virtually all human activities, given the connections with energy and land use, potentially generate greenhouse gas emissions. So there's this spatial dimension, which makes it a huge complex problem. And there's a temporal dimension as well. A quote I've got there from a NASA scientist: once carbon dioxide is added to the atmosphere, it hangs around for a long time, between 300 to 1,000 years. So there's this lag in the system as well. The cause and effect, the action and reaction is not immediate. Instead, there's long-term. You've got to get ahead of it in order to address it. Can I have the next slide, please? I would argue as well that the international dimensions make it additionally tricky, if I may say. It's got global dimensions. There are these different distributions of causes and impacts. Different countries, different industries, different kinds of people are responsible for different amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and will be affected differentially by the consequences of climate change as well. That global distribution is there in a landscape of sovereign states, countries, about 200 countries in the world, each of whom have at least nominal sovereignty. They are the highest decision-making power within their territory. Yes, there may be challenges upon their operational sovereignty, but we in global society have collectively agreed for now, we don't have a world government. We have a collection of about 200 independent nation states who work together. And they're working together on this complex, messy problem that has often been characterized as a tragedy of the commons or a dilemma of collective action. There needs to be confidence that others will take action, lest you get caught out for being what's called in the economics literature, a sucker, and others are taking you for a free ride. So there's that need for coordinated, fair, and effective, impactful action in response, orchestrated together. Go ahead, next slide, please. And to do this, many have argued we need an effective system of climate change governance. Now that use of the word governance is purposeful there. The Institute of Governance has defined the term as it's how society or groups within it organize to make decisions. And I like this diagram from an article a few years ago because it illustrates the fact that this governance is so multidimensional. So across the bottom, the x-axis, if you will, you've got 3 dimensions of society. It's not just government, it's also civil society being engaged, business being engaged as well. And if you look at the depth, perhaps the z-axis, you see that pervasiveness that I was talking about across all parts of our society, industry, energy, transport, construction, agriculture, tourism, and so on. All of these have are affected by patterns of energy consumption and use, by patterns of land use, and so on. And then that Y dimension, you've got these different scales from the village, city level through the region, the national, the continental, up to the global level as well. And as we go to the next slide, that's the layer I'll take you through. And I'd like to walk you through a climate change governance example, if you will, and just to consider about one small instance of addressing the climate change problem, and that's decarbonizing electricity services. So the electricity that we get in the world that provides us with outstanding services, allows me to use my computer here, the lighting here, and so on and so forth. In Ontario, it's largely decarbonized, about 95% decarbonized. That hasn't been always the case, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And globally, there's still a significant amount of carbon in the electricity supply system. And the electricity supply is responsible for about 1/4 of our global greenhouse gas emissions. And it's argued that this is one of the easier or earlier issues that should be addressed because compared to other options for decarbonizing, it's relatively cheaper. And indeed, many are saying we should be looking to other energy services that are presently not electrified, space heating and transportation, and thinking about how to electrify them. Well, to decarbonize electricity, if we go to the next slide, we need action at every level. So we need action at the local level. We've got local groups here like Climate Action Waterloo, REAP Green Solutions, and others who are advancing ways in which we as individuals within our local community of Waterloo Region can work to decarbonize our electricity system. Energy audits may serve to identify those bits of activity in your house that can be moved to off-peak, lower carbon times. There can be local generation projects where co-ops and others come together. So there's certainly action at the local level to address this climate change challenge to be part of the solution. If we go to the next slide, we'll take it up to the provincial level. The current government doesn't have a lot of, it's not a high priority of many of the climate change issues. So, but that hasn't always been the case. I put in front of you a picture of Nanticoke Generating Station, which when it was operating about 20, 25 years ago, was North America's largest coal-fired power station. And it was by provincial action that coal was taken out of the provincial electricity supply mix. So at the provincial level, an important means of addressing the climate challenge. If we take it to the next slide, we come to the federal level. And just to show how fast-moving an issue this is, you may have been reading that Prime Minister Trudeau this morning was announcing stricter targets for Canada with regard to its 2030 ambitions. So this may be a little bit out of date, but it's certainly the case that at the national level, we've got carbon pricing, we've got ways in which interprovincial trade is conducted and so on, which can serve to advance climate goals, decarbonizing electricity goals as well. How might it do that? It might reduce trade barriers for clean energy technologies like wind energy and so on. The federal budget can be used to advance mechanisms to incent activity in clean energy transition too. If we go to the next slide, we'll see there's the global level as well. On the left-hand side, I flagged 3 milestone international agreements. The one from the early 1990s, which signaled an intent, but nothing legally binding upon countries. The Kyoto Protocol brought in legally binding targets upon OECD or Global North countries. And then the more recent Paris Agreement turned the focus to all countries of the world, saying that all countries need to plot a pathway to to carbon neutrality and successfully addressing climate change. And it uses this notion, which we can talk more about in discussions as people wish, reflecting upon nationally determined contributions or targets, reviewing them, evaluating them, and improving them. And it's very much at the global level is where I feel the climate ambition is set. It sets the tone, the principles are laid out, and the direction for the world as a whole. Again, that tragedy of that commons, that collective faith in everyone having each other's back to move forward. The global level is very important for building that confidence. Go to the next slide, please. And all of these levels interact together. They cascade up and down. Decisions and actions and signals and so on go from the local to the provincial, national, global, back down, interacted in a variety of ways. The local level makes decisions about planning, about zoning, about construction permits, but they get signals from the other levels. The provincial level makes signals about, sets policy about how you can participate in energy markets provincially. The national level may have industrial strategy prioritizing something. The global level will talk about trade rules and investment rules. And all of these elements can serve to support or hinder each other, and they interact most definitely. Could we have the next slide, please? As we focus on that top level in this discussion, the conference of the parties, the global level, I've got laid out there as we zero in my last 5 minutes or so on what is the conference of the parties. It is, as is written there, the supreme decision-making body of the convention, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and all states that are parties to the convention are represented at the COP, at which they review the implementation of the convention and any other legal instruments that the COP adopts and takes decisions necessary to promote the effective implementation of the convention, including institutional and administrative arrangements. So that's the official word from the Secretariat. If we go to the next slide, we can start to talk about how this is played out in action. Well, COP has a history. It goes back to the mid-1990s after that Framework Convention first entered into force, and generally has met annually since that time. And it's very interesting that some COPs have been more consequential than others because of the cycle of work in the climate change governance regime, or because of other world events, or because of other phenomena. The host can have a particular influence as well, and may bring their priorities or their particular skill set to crafting a global agreement and managing a global negotiation. If we go to the next slide, please. Couple of trip down memory lane for me. I had the privilege of being at COP 1 and 2. Those were in Berlin and Geneva, respectively. And I was a young academic at the London School of Economics at that time, starting my teaching and research career, and interested in international climate change negotiations, observing and writing about it. COPs were relatively small back then, about 2,000 people gathered in Berlin. They relied upon lots of stacks of paper, that's for sure. And the geopolitics was very important, but had a very different constitution to it, if you will. It's interesting to see how the global powers have shifted. The balance of power has shifted over the interim 25 years. If we go to the next slide, I'll just share with you that I had the privilege of being at COP 21 and 25 as well, in Paris and Madrid, respectively. broader agenda than I had been used to from those earlier COPs. Many more people engaged. The numbers were much higher, of the order of 30,000, and many more sectors engaged as well. And the ways in which states were sharing the stage with non-state actors was much more sophisticated, if you will. Paris had an urgency to it, and we now have the Paris Agreement. Madrid had an improvisation to it, as Madrid stood in to take over the COP in place of Chile at a relatively late stage. And if we go to the next slide, we're working up towards moving towards Glasgow and COP26, which is being delivered by the UK government in partnership with Italy. And we'll be digging into that a bit more during this session. So on the next slide, two final slides for you. One, I just talk a little bit about how Waterloo, the University of Waterloo, will engage with COP26. And here I have a little bit of an IC3 hat on, and I have a little bit of an Associate Vice President International hat on as well. I circled, you'll recall maybe the diagram from earlier in the slides about the different levels interacting together. And I've circled there the interactions between the global and the local. We are a singular institution that reaches out across our community, across our province, our nation, and the world, engaging with a global level event. So it's very much the place that we are both going up in that arrow, bringing ideas to it, and also there's a downward travel as well. We're taking learnings from COP26 as a university. And I've flagged our strategic plan on the right there, and the importance of students, research, and community. And all of those can be strengthened by our engagement with COP26. The ways in which students will get outstanding experiential education through engagement, the way in which our world-class researchers will be contributing to the agenda of COP26, contributing to the decision-making and having their research enriched by it as well. And then all of us, like the activity today, we are a community at different scale engaging in this global event. I've also put at the bottom there just a logo from one of the international relationships we have. And it will be very interesting to see, we're already in conversation about how we might engage with others around the world, other universities and other partners. If we go to the next slide, the question is, how can you engage with COP26? And I've purposely put some photos on here from COP25 because we have a number of people who will spark discussion and ideas in your mind about how you might be able to engage in COP26. And the question and answer area remains open for anyone who wants to put a question in. But at this point, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Atkinson to the virtual stage. And while Elizabeth is coming forward, I'll just introduce you to her. And Elizabeth has 20 years experience working in climate change adaptation policy. And she currently serves as the Vice Chair of Natural Resources Canada's National Adaptation Platform and represents Canada as a climate change adaptation negotiator to the UNFCCC and COP processes for the Government of Canada. Through her leadership of a strategic adaptation policy team, she's got a number of current focuses, which I'm sure she will talk about during this conversation and looking forward to hearing more about. And the last thing before I welcome Elizabeth fully, as I'll say, she's a great friend of the Faculty of Environment and the University of Waterloo, and I'm so delighted that she's with us here today. So Elizabeth, great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ian. Just before we start, I'd like to acknowledge how privileged and grateful I am to be living and working on the traditional and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation here in what we know as Ottawa.
Thank you very much. Good, wonderful. And Elizabeth, maybe to start off, I'd love to hear a bit more about your work and your team. And as I've tried to lay out sort of that big picture of this huge thing that is COP and the architecture, anything you'd like to share about how your actions are fitting in and being a part of that?
You know, I loved your presentation. It reminded me of why I love working both in the adaptation field and in the climate change field, it is a big, messy, and complex problem. And if you love complexity, this is where you drive your career. And for us, I work with Natural Resources Canada, so not Environment Canada. Environment Canada has the policy lead, as you know, on climate change, but we are all directed in the federal government to contribute to working on climate change. In particular, on the adaptation file, our unit, which is called the Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division within Natural Resources Canada, has been around for some 20 years. And we've been working on developing the knowledge base for adaptation. We work in co-delivering or co-developing, if you will, the knowledge and tools and skills necessary to understand what the impacts of climate change and what actions would be appropriate to take in that area or for addressing climate impacts. We deliver specifically the national adaptation, the national assessment of climate change adaptation knowledge. So you know the national assessments work determines lays out the state of what we know about adaptation in Canada. So we do that particular piece of work. We deliver, as you mentioned, the National Adaptation Platform, and plenary, which essentially convenes all the provinces and territories, the national Indigenous organizations, industry, professional bodies, the core federal departments working on adaptation. We bring them together in a gathering to determine priorities for adaptation in Canada, to align our policies and align resources to do that. Saying all that and having that depth of experience here within NRCan, we have been contributing to the COP as an expert in the negotiation team. I was looking at your list there, Ian, and it was since probably 2006, 2005, 2006, in that area somewhere. I am the third representative from NRCan. So before me, there were Don Lemon and Beth Lavender, and I'm relatively new to the process. So I'll give you the best answers I can as we go forward, but that's why NRCan is there. It's because of its deep technical expertise. While most of the negotiators are within the Environment Canada's international negotiations division. But we are there because of our understanding of the problem.
That's wonderful. And that gives me a bit of a bridge, Elizabeth, into thinking about, as you've got this rich knowledge and this technical expertise, how do you, and speak either the before or after COP or the during COP, how are you put to use or how are you deployed? Your comments make me think it's almost sort of the support to the frontline negotiators, but please share with us and again, I'm sensing that the day-to-day at COP might be somewhat different than the before and after.
Yeah, indeed. No, I am one of two adaptation negotiators. So we have a team. Canada's team is probably 16, 18 total negotiators. And so that gives you a sense of the proportion that's on the mitigation side and on the adaptation side. So the issues that I cover at COP are the Adaptation Committee, the matters concerning the least developed countries, and the Nairobi Work Program. And that's a program of reaching out to partners to help them work with us on particular areas of solutions for adaptation and knowledge development. So the day-to-day at COP is quite hectic. this is not something you take on to do if you want to see the world, because you ain't seeing the world, right? You see an airport, you see, and sometimes, you see the inside of your hotel room, but, only for a matter of hours, because your day starts very, very early and you have a meeting with your negotiating team. You then go and often have delegation meetings with, and that starts all before you have, your first working session where you go and you sit in large rooms with the representatives of of all the nations who are there that have an interest in the particular area that you're discussing. Once you have working sessions, those are what we call informal working sessions. In between that, when there are issues that come up that need discussing, we have group huddles, and either with our team or with other countries to work through and particular issues. We also then, those types of working sessions can go on late into the evening until finally decisions are made with respect to text. We often stumble back to our hotel rooms to basically read another shift of documents and do a reporting back to every day. There's the reporting back to the team, which comes back to Canada, which is analyzed by the group here, getting our feedback here in Canada and getting instructions as we move ahead. So in the 2-week period that we are there on the ground, we have one day off, which is the Sunday in between. so there is that process. So that's at COP, but leading up to COP, there are the intersessionals. There are also the work that we do this year in particular is particularly interesting because, of course, there were the intersessionals didn't happen, which are the meetings in between, the formal meetings in between the COPs, in which, there is a body of work that continues well beyond the curtains of the COP. And these meetings were held virtually this year, and there were continual. The adaptation committee meetings and other committee meetings were all virtual. So if you were wanting to see what was going on behind the curtains, this was a great year for it, because everything, you could watch it on YouTube. You go into the UNFCCC websites, the agendas, everything is there, right? So it's amazing and you can track the work that is going on behind the scenes. And as I say, this year is particularly active because the UK presidency is driving, is aiming very high and driving ambition and engaging countries right from the start. They've been engaging with us, calling us, talking with us on particular issues now since December at least. So there's a lot happening right now, and that's leading up to our June intersessional, and which again is going to be virtual, and potentially another intersessional because we have so much work to do because of the COVID situation, perhaps in November or September, and then the COP in November. So.
Wow. And I'll come back. The UK is a great point, and as the Climate Leaders Summit is going on as we speak, so the international dimension, I'll come back to it in a second. But just before I do, anything you'd like to share about the way I recall that sometimes people say, where does Canada stand on XXX? Well, Canada is a very multi-dimensional element. So Canada is made up of federal government. There's different ministries. Canada has different levels of governments. There's the civil society business engagement as well. So I guess, Elizabeth, in the context of getting the Canadian position at COP and so on, anything you want to reflect on about the ways in which federal ministries work together, levels of government, or anything you'd like to react to?
Right. Well, we have, discussion on the issues at COP have been on the table for some time, right? I mean, none of them are new. It's a problem. It's an issue of evolution, and the discussions that we have in Canada reflect that evolution. So, you know, uh, we knew, like for instance, today's announcement at the climate summit today about the increased ambition for Canada. This is something that you know has been talked about and consulted with, particularly you know with the provinces and territories. There is always ongoing discussion with on all the issues with our um, with stakeholders. I don't like to call them stakeholders because, you know, I mean, we're all in this, right? So provinces and territories, the national Indigenous organizations, we are hearing and consulting with civil society as well through various mechanisms. I mentioned also the adaptation platform earlier, which is, as I say, this is one of the convening mechanisms of the Government of Canada on adaptation. And it's through this that we develop our internal positioning, not necessarily saying, okay, here we are, we're going to develop Canada's position now on COP, but Canada's positions are generally, you know, those positions that are the values of Canada, and like inclusion, and, you know, and particularly, you know, when you go to COP, what are you negotiating? You know, you're looking to ensure that things like gender and Indigenous knowledge and larger integration, that these elements are reflected and brought into you know the global discussions on climate, and ensuring that moving forward as we take, you know, into account things such as the global goals on adaptation or how to measure progress on adaptation, that we do so in ways that is respectful and that is part, that's a meaningful measurement, and that it has to be a measurement that is capable of picking up adaptation other than through numbers, but into qualitative mechanisms and as well as quantitative mechanisms. Understanding what you know where impacts are, that impacts are transboundary, you know, and that what happens in one country very much has an implication in another. So we have a shared resilience, you know, we had share impacts for sure, but now we have to think, you know, about the extent of what the impacts in other countries have on the ground here in Canada, and with investments Canada makes. So you see that there is that line. I love when you showed the graphs this way. I was wanting to take a marker and just do one horizontal one, right? Do that. Because and so it's the discussions that we have, and ongoing continuous discussions here domestically, is what informs us, right? And so when we go to the international fora, and we're all the time, of course, looking for and engaging for voices and new perspectives to continue to include and to inform us in more, you know, help us learn, basically, as we go into these into our negotiation sessions and our meetings between sessions.
Fantastic. And let me, you flagged it a bit, I'll come back to it. Talked about the UK presidency, and I guess I'm just wondering whether I believe the UK laid out a year or so ago its particular priorities it's going to look for. Has there been a particular style or flavor or set of themes that you see the UK presidency is infusing the discussions with? And I recognize they're doing leadership with Italy as well. And
Right.
so has that played out in certain ways in the work you're doing at all?
Oh yeah, we have had, you know, it's been very active engagement internationally. So the UK is using its presidency to really drive action. So this net zero is a big component. Green financing package, particularly linking the recovery from COVID to green finance. That's a huge component. The third component is building resilience. So those are their three big pillars. And we have been, they are reaching out consciously, have a, you know, if you want to talk about a campaign, this is a campaign, right? So they have begun, they're also chair or president of the G7 this year, and Italy, the G20. So they have been using that forum as well to drive the to be that ramp up, if you will, into the COP negotiations. So I also see things that come through because, you know, it's funny because we're kind of like our division and myself are kind of like this funnel from everything to the international on adaptation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, all week I've been working on communiques for G7, G20, all this sort of thing. All in the meantime, you know, fielding calls from or requests from other of our countries that we work with within the umbrella organization as to what's Canada going to say about, you know, so the UK is asking for all countries, for instance, again, I'm talking about adaptation, but they've reached out for countries to commit to a communication on adaptation around the timing of COP26. So this is a big deal because, as you point out, you know, when you talked about, well, what does the COP do, right? And it really is that global level of confidence building. So if you're asking countries to commit to communicate what you're doing on adaptation, right? You know, they're going to want to, you're going to want to be in a position of saying, this is what we're doing, right? And for Canada, you know, we've got to pick up our socks a little bit on adaptation, right? We do a lot of work on the international side, and domestically we do a lot of work, but we're only now just starting to develop, you know, a national adaptation strategy, right? So we're just starting, and we're some years out from having that done. But we've been doing a lot of work. We've been, you know, planning to adapt, and actually, you know, throughout that whole level from federal to local, we've been doing that, but we're not great at telling that story. So we have to tell that story as well. But as far as, so there's, as I mentioned, you know, the UK is pushing that for that communique. They're also talking about what happens after COP. They don't want to give up, right? So they're talking about global Britain. They're talking about global diplomacy, right? Climate diplomacy as their thing. So after COP, they're saying, you know, we're going to create a mechanism that allows us to help other presidencies in moving forward. So Africa is the likely host, I believe, for the COP27. So they're very much wanting to work and set up infrastructure, or, you know, their diplomatic infrastructure to help with that delivery as well. So there's a lot, there is a lot happening. You will see things happen, like even today, right? There have been meetings, ministerial meetings. There's all the meetings that you see. There's a big, you know, lineup of them from now to November. They are all engineered behind the scenes, right? And the UK is playing a leading role in pushing and putting that pressure on. It was one of the reasons why, you know, today's announcements, both for US and for Canada, have manifested.
Great. And Elizabeth, we've had a question come in which asks a bit about climate finance, and in particular, the $100 billion fund for climate finance. And the question speaks to a bit about how progress on it and how one can assure that funds are used as effectively and impactfully as possible. and especially the funds in the Global South, be that for adaptation or mitigation or other sorts of elements. Feel free to come in on any bits of that as you might wish. I guess speaking to your work in particular, the adaptation element. Any comment about the international transfer of funds of climate finance?
Yeah, so interesting is the dichotomy between commitment of funds and implementation, right? So of the funds, historically the data right now is that 50% of the funds committed for mitigation are actually implemented, right? 35% around that area for adaptation. So there's the difference, the countries can commit, but then we have to get into implementation. Particularly in developing countries, this is a problem. They have to go through the funding process. They have to, and we can, of course, they have to have their national adaptation strategy, and that is linked to their development strategies. And they want to, you work through the mechanisms, the global funding process, where, and it is difficult to get through those processes. And this is where there are problems right now, is in that implementation stage. It is getting, where they can make it through, where you have least developing countries making it through that process. It is at the stage where they get caught up, usually is at the stage, they have consultants to help them work through their applications, but it is in those last stages that in the iterations back and forth with their applications for various funding, that it is a very long and arduous process. And that's one of the areas within the least developed countries work that I work on with respect to adaptation. That is one of the areas that we're working very hard to try to move that, to accelerate that process. Not to say that it doesn't need to be rigorous, that people do have to, distribute the funds in a way that is appropriate, but that it does have to be a much more straightforward process that allows for quicker access.
Great, thank you for that. And Elizabeth, one last question, and then I hope you'll join us for the Q&A at the end as well. But my research has been on mitigation, which has traditionally had the spotlight in climate change governance, though perhaps we're seeing on the global scene adaptation increasingly. Any reflections on the global standing of adaptation, or how its perception is evolving?
Yes, well, it was actually the global goal on adaptation that held up COP20 or COP25. It was that initiative. So the African Group of Nations and others, but particularly the African Group of Nations, have been particularly active, I guess, in ensuring, and rightly so, that the global goal on adaptation be a standing item on the COP agenda, and that it, the better definition, a fuller definition. What does that, we have, it is defined, but it's defined broadly within the Paris Agreement about, advancing resilience and enhancing capacity, right? Funding for adaptation. So, I mean, it is along those three components but the definition, it is not a number, right? Like it is, So there's a question. There's a question around the global goal, and is that number, or could a global goal be tied to a number, right? And if it's a number, then is it finance, right? So as you can tell, that's an issue. So yeah, there's there's that component out there, but in the meantime, people are recognizing, and as I say, the UK has been particularly vociferous on the need to advance adaptation. We've had the Global Commission on Adaptation as well, and their particular summit, their climate summit there in January, where our Prime Minister announced, Canada's intent to be ambitious with respect to adaptation as well. We will see this again play out again at the G7 and others. This is a pillar of the UK strategy. So in all of these lead up meetings, adaptation is figuring largely. So because it is figuring largely on the international stage, we will see it ramp up back here at home in Canada as well. So happy for that convergence, if you will.
Great. Elizabeth, this has been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please don't go too far away. And I'll tell everyone listening that if you want to put a question in the Q&A tab for Elizabeth, I'll try and make sure there's some time at the end when Elizabeth rejoins us for the broader discussion, and I can put that to her. But for now, Elizabeth, thank you very much. And we'll see you in about 20-25 minutes.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ian.
And I now invite our three former students, or three young professionals who engaged as students in COP25 to the stage, and delighted to see them. And welcome to the three of you, and thank you for engaging today. And I'll give brief introductions. I think I've come to learn there can be an order on my screen, but in the Zoom world, who knows what order it is. So I'll just go with the order I have here. Valentina Castillo Cifuentes is the program coordinator of the University of Waterloo's Youth and Innovation Project. She holds a master's in sustainability management from University of Waterloo, and she has experience in community engagement through various research projects. Welcome to you, Valentina. Loeen Hill is a PhD candidate at the School of Environment, Resources and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo. Through an intersectional transdisciplinary approach, she investigates disaster risk governance in the Caribbean, specifically looking at how social networks, genders, and power can influence policymaking. Welcome to you, Loeen. And Brooklyn Rushton is a PhD student in geography and environmental management at the University of Waterloo, working with Dr. Daniel Scott and Dr. Michelle Ruti. And her research focuses on sustainable tourism pathways in mountain destinations and stewardship of large-scale protected areas. Welcome to you, Brooklyn. And wonderful to see the three of you again. And I say see the three of you again, for the benefit of those in the audience, all four of us were at COP25. Brooklyn and I were part of the week one delegation from the University of Waterloo, and Valentina and Loeen were part of the week two delegation from the University of Waterloo. So we've got those perspectives to draw upon, which is fantastic. So I've got a series of questions here, and as being suggested through my comments, we're going to have some time at the end for a general Q&A from the audience. So please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A period. But first question to all three of you, and Valentina, maybe I'll start with you, is just who knows, this is to all three of you, did you know what you were getting into as you headed to Spain? And what was unexpected to you about your particular COP experience? Valentina.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm very honored and lucky. So the first thing, it was like how quickly Spain was able to put a conference with 30,000 people in a couple of weeks. As we all know, it's supposed to be in Chile, but it couldn't happen. So I wasn't an expert on climate change when I attended COP25, and I'm still not a climate expert either. I knew a very high level what COP was and what was happening there, but I didn't have a deep understanding of what was being discussed. And I was lucky to learn all those things there and why COP25 was important. But one of the things that I didn't expect was actually at the green zone. So COP25 had two zones, so the blue zone and the green zone. So the blue zone was where all the accredited members were, so all the university delegation and all the other national delegations as well. But the green zone, all the civil society was able to participate. And we were also allowed to go there. And what surprised me the most was how engaged civil society was and how many young people were there, and see how their actions in their local communities were so much faster than what was happening in the blue zone. And it seemed that it was clearer for them that there is a climate emergency, and that's something that we didn't see as much happening in the blue zone.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Louine, I'll pass the same question on to you. What was surprising or unexpected about your COP25 experience?
Thank you, Jan, and thank you again for the invitation. And I think what was surprising was the dynamism that a lot of people running around. And I mean, I guess when I arrived, it was like have this image of people mainly sitting in rooms and negotiating and going back and forth, but like, no, there was people running around because there was change. And so it was really dynamic. And even I think Valentina can attest, we put on our 10,000 steps a day, just going through rooms and like changes, like to see what was happening. So I think that was one of the most unexpected things that I realized.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And no, the energy is amazing, and the ways in which people are milling around and everything, most definitely. Brooklyn, I'll put the same question to you. Surprises or unexpected about your experience?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks so much, Ian. I'm looking forward to chatting with you all. Mine is kind of similar to Louine's. I think the busyness of it all was the most surprising thing. When I first arrived, I was like, I want to go to a bunch of different events that encompass different topics, get a lot of variety and perspectives. And then once I actually arrived, you realize it's literally impossible to attend everything that you had set out to do. Mostly one, because the venue is huge. So going across the whole venue takes about 30 minutes. And also there's just like 20 plus events happening at any moment. So by the end, I kind of streamlined my interests and started mostly focusing on events with like local climate change adaptation and Indigenous-led climate action. So I think just the busyness was the most surprising thing.
Fantastic. And it speaks to the richness of the agenda, most definitely. I'll just share with you, for me at COP25, a surprise for me was I was at the first week, whereas in Paris, I had been at the second week. So the difference in the dynamics, the first week was a bit more like a technical conference. And the second week, more of the political negotiations and the high stakes and so on as well. Second question to all of you. And now COP Madrid was, gosh, it's hard to think about now. Sort of the time has a different meaning, doesn't it? But it was a couple of years ago now. And the ways in which that experience has been impactful for you, or has been learning for you, transformational, the skills you've been able to make use of, just any lasting impact of COP. And Louine, can I start with you on this one?
Yes, so I think for me, it was a bit of a disappointment, but like the fact that toward the end, because there was so much topics that was on the table in the negotiation, like the human right aspect was kind of left out. And so, it was basically left out. And so basically the way that has shaped my research is that now, like my background is mostly ecological, but now I'm looking really at mostly the human aspect, because those are things that are usually left out in the global governance discussions. And even because we went there in the second week, and so I had the opportunity to talk with some of the representatives from the LDC group. And so there was a bit of a disappointment in that aspect of things. And so it kind of motivated me to really focus on that and the influence on decision making. So yeah, that was what kind of influenced me going forward.
But yeah, no, really good. And if so in the sense that you coming to understand there was an absence of attention to something, sounds like it's motivated your work and being a driver and so on as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And hopefully that can help. I mean, the discussion that happened on the ground and that basically are not necessarily well represented in those global sphere, then hopefully, it can help like advance that rather than having that disconnect between the conversation happening in the global forum and then what's happening locally. So
that's fantastic. And it makes me think of my arrows from my presentation. Don't assume there's smooth flow of issues from the local to the global. There can be power is at play. You're probably seeing this in your PhD a lot and everything, which can restrict agendas and so on. So
exactly.
That's fantastic. Good. Brooklyn, can I turn to you and any lasting impact or messages, learnings you're taking forward, anything you want to reflect on?
Definitely. Yeah, I had similar experiences to Louine. I was disappointed to see kind of no, I wouldn't say failure, but there was a lot of failure on the global stage, I think, in terms of like power dynamics going into a lot of the rooms. I remember one in particular, I went to a negotiation on Indigenous knowledge in climate change action and ambition. And it was a bunch of people from the nations, and then all Indigenous people were behind them and didn't get to speak. And I thought that was just like I was disappointed in that for sure. But on the other side, COP25 did still give me hope on the climate crisis. And the negotiations didn't really go as planned, which was disappointing. But I thought it was really inspiring to see all the local level and ground level action that's happening across the world, which you wouldn't see without going to an event like that. And it gave me hope that despite like visible action on global and national stages, that there is a lot of action happening from civil society and some NGOs on the local level. And it personally did really shift my research focus to more local level action and community-based climate action. So that was a positive coming out of it for sure.
Good. And that last point, really interesting. And was it moving to the local and so on, was it more inspiration by these stories from around the world you saw, or a frustration with the global level, or a bit of both?
Definitely a bit of both. I did go to a lot of talks about local level actions. That was inspiring. And then going to those negotiations, there's just so much complexity happening at the local level. And I was like, I don't really know. There is obviously a role for every single level, but I think for me, I was really inspired to go on that local level and be able to do climate action from an equitable perspective, understanding the social dynamics. And I think that needs to happen in order for change to really occur.
Fantastic, thank you. And Valentina, I'll turn to you now. Same question as you, in the time since your experience at COP25, learnings or messages or things you're taking forward, please.
Yeah, I actually got very hopeful about the local level. Like Brooklyn said, it to me was something that I was studying at that point, how local governments can implement sustainability plans, not climate action plans, but sustainability. And I felt that what civil society is doing, it's actually good. They really are taking responsibility. But on a personal note, one of the lasting impacts I had is that I've been invited to talk about my experience at COP25. Like this is the third time that I'm talking about it, and I felt that's something I didn't expect, and I feel very honored to be able to be part of this conversation. I did great connections. I was able to network and met incredible people that were really good mentors while I was at COP. People have been asking me in job interviews about COPs. I felt that was actually very important to me, and I'm thankful for the university to give me that opportunity to participate in there. And something even more personal, I think that after COP finished, I was able to go back home in Chile, and I was able to share my experience with my family back home, and to share my experience and what we lived at COP that week. And thanks to the technology and to Zoom right now, my family is able to attend this panel right now and to learn more about climate change and to know what happens at COP. So I think that's a really personal impact, and I think we don't think about those things while we're there. But that's what happened to me, at least.
That's fantastic. And you've struck a chord with me on this. I've just come off of a year's sabbatical, which, well, 2020 was not as anyone thought it would be. But I found reflecting upon my experience in the sabbatical really deepened the learning in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'm just wondering, as you've prepared for different audiences, reflecting upon your experience at COP, has it reinforced learnings or been helpful in your own professional development?
Yeah, I think it has reinforced learning. I think that I have volunteered at the region in climate actions and working with young people, and I felt that the learnings that I had coming from civil society, especially in the green zone, like how young people have a voice, how any other people from civil society have a voice, and they are actually taking action to improve their communities. I think that's something that I saw there, I learned, and being able to see it in my own community, and now being able to work at the Youth and Innovation Project and see how young people can make changes. That's been something that has come from COP, but it's been growing, and it's a reassurance to see that I can also be a convener or help move towards a change, and that's been incredible for me.
Fantastic, thank you for that. And let me turn to a new question, and Brooklyn, maybe I'll start with you. And so we've been reflecting on COP25, now we'll turn to COP26, and you may well not be going to Glasgow. You may be tuning in virtually, who knows? But as you're following it, the extent to which you need to in your professional life or so on, do you have any particular issue you've got your eyes on? Any particular expectations, hopes for what will unfold in Glasgow in November? Brooklyn?
Yeah. So I think I'm really interested to see if nations can agree on Article 6, which, for those of you who don't know or are listening, it creates a framework for mechanisms that allow nations to trade emissions. And they didn't, that was kind of a big focus at COP25. And mostly in the second week, I know, which I wasn't there, but that was a lot of the political discussion on that behalf. And they didn't come to a decision there. So I'm hoping COP26 will bring more agreement on global emission reductions in an equitable way. I'm also curious to see what role the United States will play at COP26 under the new administration, given that Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement and now Biden has re-signed. I think it'll be interesting to see what role the US has on the global stage at COP26.
Fantastic, great points. And yes, we've been talking about the summit that President Biden is hosting right now, and the US has announced new targets or ambitions in light of that. It's just sort of interesting, and building on Elizabeth's comments, the way in which G7, G20, various groups are trying to set this climate ambition. But yes, it is good to see the US back, at least from my perspective, back in multi-level governance. And the carbon trading issue, I had one of my older articles on the screen earlier, back in the days of joint implementation, activities implemented jointly, and global emissions trading. It will be interesting to see how Article 6 plays out. That's fantastic. Good. And Valentina, same question for you. As you look to COP26 or the emerging climate change agenda, is there an issue you have your eye on, or something you're going to keep tabs on?
Yeah, I'm actually really interested to see how the discussions around climate change will be performed around this pandemic. I think that we all know that COVID-19 has affected us, and it will be really interested to see how these discussions about how COVID-19 impacted the fight towards climate change. I mean, the progress towards fighting climate change. And so I think that it will be really interesting to see how that's happening. And then on the other note, I think I'm also interested to see how the role of young people are playing in their communities again after these 2 years. It's been a long time now, and to see how they're meaningfully engaged in these negotiations and that their call for climate action is heard. Because at least during COP25, they were they were really critic towards the decisions that were being made at COP. So I think that it will be really interesting to see if they're actually hearing young people.
Great points. And as I understand it, I think the Italian government in particular is taking a lead on some of the youth engagement, and the fora that they're developing will be interesting to see how those unfold, and encourage those on the call to engage in that as well. And great point about the pandemic's impact. I mean, two things that come to my mind are the heightened emphasis, which is fantastic, upon inclusiveness. Might that translate? But then the heightened pressure upon all governments' finances, and how will that play out as well? Excellent.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Good. And Loeen, your thoughts about COP26 and any particular issues you have your eye on?
Yes. So, well, there's a couple of them. I mean, I saw that the president of COP this year has highlighted about 5 key areas, and people are one of them. So I'm hopeful that at least this year, like some of the human rights consideration will be more at the forefront of the discussions rather than an afterthought, or even worse, like totally removed. Another thing also is, like Brooklyn said, the Article 6, but also I'm looking at like the loss and damage to see basically what's going to happen with that. Last year we had the US and I think there was Australia blocking basically on conversation. So hopefully this year with the new administration in the US, though I'm a bit maybe cynical about that, but let's hope that there might be a bit some advancement in that regard. And then lastly, and that was one thing that also Elizabeth mentioned, sorry, it's like some of the rules regarding financing that I'm hoping that they will have some discussion, because so I'm also working as like a kind of part-time consultant in climate change adaptation. And during my work, I also came across some of the I had the opportunity to explore a bit how some of the funding related to the Green Climate Fund, how that works, how country can actually access that, and the loop they have to go through to basically get funding. And so I'm kind of hoping that the discussion around finance would address those things, and that rather than having a really top-down, northern-based requirement for countries to access funding, there will be a more like the actual recipient country based process, that that there will be a recognition of their own institutional building, and so that the hoops that they have to go through to access funding reflect that reality. So I'm just hoping that, and well, I don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, it's online this time, so maybe we will have more access to see what's happening in behind the scenes and stuff like that. So let's see.
Fantastic, and great point. Very important reminder. It's not simply the statement, as has been a theme here, pledging a resource. It's the whole process, who gets access to the resource, the ease by which they can secure participation, so on and so forth. So no, wonderful, that's for sure. Elizabeth, maybe I'll ask you to join us for the last question or two, which would be fantastic. And I'll say to everyone watching, please feel free if there's any question you would like to put to any of the panelists, any of the participants today, please feel free to do that. But I'll put a question to all of you right now. And it's what advice would you give to future students to make the most of COP and whether they go or not? So for the young professionals on the three of you who are at COP25, thinking about students who may have the opportunity to physically go to COP in the future, any advice you give to them, or just others? I mean, as Elizabeth has hinted at, and many of you have hinted at, it will probably, I've heard, it will probably be a hybrid engagement in some ways. And so there might be opportunity no matter where we're sitting to engage in the process. And Elizabeth, from your vantage point, as you see the audience, University of Waterloo students and others, sort of any advices from your perspective, how people can engage in the process would be useful to hear as well. Valentina, can I turn to you to start? Just any advice you'd give anywhere within that remit I threw out?
Yeah, so as Brooklyn and Lewin mentioned, and I think we all mentioned, COVID's very overwhelming. You get there and there's so many things to do, so many options of panels that you can attend. I will say try to organize yourself. If you have something in particular you want to follow, try to organize yourself, as even though you're gonna get there and probably you're gonna get a little bit loose. But I will say that be prepared to learn from other perspectives. I think that's the richness of COP is that there's a global conference, right? So like you can learn from the global south, from so many other things that sometimes didn't come to your head. I will say try to network as much as you can, because in those conversations are when you learn the most. At least that was something that happened to me. And I think talking to people and to different organizations, and you can learn a lot. And I think that's try to understand that COP, it's a learning process. Even if you don't learn a lot as you expected at the beginning, and if you learn just a little, I think that's something that you will still reflect upon after. So yeah, just take advantage of every opportunity that you have there.
Fantastic, great advice. Thank you for that. And Lewin, can I turn to you and any advice you'd like to give to students out there?
I think I'm gonna second Valentina on that. Like, be prepared to network, and I personally don't like just networking. So that's but just be prepared to be out there and to not be afraid to talk to people. Even like there are a fellow student who participates, so just having conversation while waiting for your next session, sitting there, and so it's actually really, really interesting and give other perspective as to from what's happening in the not only in the negotiation rooms, but all the side events that are happening around the area. So that's also yeah, put yourself out there. This time, so the hybrid system will be kind of also helpful to have access to more. So, well, we might not get the 10K step, but at least we'll have access to more event as we can like kind of shift between windows, I guess, and get to hear really what's happening. And yeah, just be prepared, like and we did that exercise before we go, so just have like, we have the spreadsheet, like what's happening, how to, and all that. So just be prepared in regard to that. That's going to change, but having an idea from the get-go is really helpful to get started.
Fantastic, great advice. Thank you for that. And Brooklyn, I'll turn to you with the same question.
Sounds good. I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Lewin and Valentina said. Definitely, if you are able to go to physically be at COP, organize yourself for sure. The events are normally posted online before COP, so you can choose what you're interested in, but don't be tied to that schedule because things pop up. For example, there was a huge protest going on the week that I was there. So that wasn't really planned before the event. It just kind of happened. And so a lot of us went to that. Definitely network, which can be scary for sure. I was definitely nervous to go and talk to people, but I actually ended up getting a job out of a network or a person that I was chatting with. So you never know, and everyone's super friendly. And just remember that everyone's there for the same reason. So it's really easy to connect with people. You just talk about what you're interested in, and everyone wants to push the same agenda. So there's that kind of takes a little bit of the stress out of that. And if you're not able to actually go to COP, get yourself knowledgeable about the international system, where Canada stands. Ian and Elizabeth did a great job at going through this. And you can join clubs like Climate Students at UW, and you can bring your perspectives there and chat with potential future delegates that may go in the future, and yeah, network through organizations like that. Those are kind of my key pieces of advice.
Fantastic, Brooklyn. Thank you for that. And Elizabeth, I'll put it to you and interpret it however you want, as students on the call want to engage with the climate governance process. Please.
Yeah, you know what? You can't be at a better time in history. You cannot, right? This is youth are playing a key role. People are listening. Don't forget, at COP25, Greta Thunberg was there. Right? Now, you don't all have to be her, but you all have networks, and you've mentioned them all. The organizations that you're being involved in, be visible, right? Governments are going to reach out to you. You be proactive, reach out to your governments. Everybody has youth on the agenda. All governments. Government of Canada has youth on the agenda. And anybody else, your countries, same thing. So be visible, reach out to people, respond. If there's something, that a government puts out, respond quickly. So my point about being visible is that they will reach out to you if they know you're there. Networks, everybody's mentioned it, important, use it, use everything, right? The COVID thing, we're going to the hybrid likely. There may be some in-person stuff, but it will be, who needs to be there on that kind of basis. Because of this, we all have new ways of connecting. The UNFCCC is looking at this as an opportunity. UK presidency is looking at this as an opportunity. Be aware, use your virtual presence, and in whichever ways that takes us. The last point, Ian, I just want to make is that, as I say, this is a point in history right now. Just remember that we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and climate change is still at the highest level of interest for governments. Think about that, right? And we will be looking to merge agendas in the recovery from climate change with, climate, with health, with development, with the social agenda. It's a lot, but we got to kind of help people focus on where the priorities are, right? So if we get something done, and I'm certainly speaking to Louise's point about, the capacity to implement, right? It's okay to say, yeah, the funds are there, but unless you got the capacity to access these funds and then implement what's on the ground and make sure that it merges with your priorities, right? Those are key things. So be visible, right? And make yourselves known.
Elizabeth, that's fantastic. And I've got one last question for you, and I'm thinking it's a nice segue from what you just said. One of our audience asked, what advice would you give to students who are interested in environmental policy as a career? We've got about 1 minute. Please go ahead.
Be visible, make yourself.
That's what I sense, perhaps.
But for sure, if you're all governments, whether provincial and federal, all have student placements. There's lots of opportunity for work in the through the various programs, the hiring programs. If you're interested in doing a stint, you know, come in again, make application, be visible, and just engage and network. Use your network. Right.
That's fantastic advice. And one more question came in asking about whether there's a specific process and requirements for UW students to be considered as delegates to COP. And Natalie at IC3 is supporting me by just saying that you keep posted on IC3's website. Details will be there as the eligibility requirements will be confirmed in due course. And of course, as has been mentioned a number of times in this presentation, we don't know how global health situation will unfold, global travel situation, and so on and so forth. So we're not sure what it will look like in terms of a delegation in person or virtual or whatever the case may be. But the IC3 website is the place to monitor. The Twitter feed that I had at the beginning as well. And they're well-versed and well-experienced in making a clear and transparent process for engaging the community and giving students the opportunity. We have, colleagues, run out of time, unfortunately. So thank you all for a wonderful discussion. Thank you for bringing your knowledge, your experience, your perspectives, and it's been fantastic. So thank you to all four of you for engaging in this. And I'm sure the virtual world is giving you virtual applause, however that occurs. And I'm giving you the tangible applause right here. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank Natalie and the team at IC3 for putting on this outstanding event. It's been seamless and easy for me to engage. And I know when that occurs, that's because a lot of people behind the scenes are doing a lot of hard work. So I'm very appreciative. I think I speak on behalf of everyone here to Natalie and the team at IC3 for doing this. I'd like to thank as well everyone who's participating, all the attendees today. Thank you for giving us some of your time today and being part of this exploration of COP26. We know that there's many Zoom demands upon you these days and many other demands as well. So to spend time with us, we're all very appreciative of that, most definitely. And it just leaves to me to conclude, to say to everyone, please be well. Stay safe and happy Earth Day. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.